Now joining us on the hotline is a man that played for the Rangers, the Panthers, the Flyers, the Islanders, and the Devils. Played in the NHL from 1981 to 2002, and that's John Vanbiesbrouck. Beezer, it's Zach and Chase here in Philly. How are you?
Gentlemen, good to be on with you.
We're real excited this time of the year, NHL playoffs. You know what it's like to play in a Ranger-Flyer series. You did that in 85, 86 when you won the Vezina. These two teams have a strong sense of animosity towards each other. What was it like to play in a series between these two rivals, though?
Well, it was a real rivalry back then. You know, I mean, it was known as the Patrick Division then, so it was a little bit different. We played a lot of games, including exhibition against each other, but I still believe that there's some good, healthy animosity there now, and it's going to be a great series.
And the big stories with the Flyers right now is their starting goaltender, Steve Mason, is not going to play tonight. He had a little bit of a head injury in that Pittsburgh Penguins game to end off the season. And Ray Emery's been 7-2 up against the New York Rangers, lost this year 4-1. How big of a loss is Mason? But Emery is still a decent option to back up Mason.
Yeah, I think, I read a little bit about today's game and the comment from Coach Craig Berube saying good teams find ways to get it done. And I think that's basically a really good quote. But here's a little insight is that, Ray Emery has a lot of playoff experience. I mean, he led the Ottawa Senators to the finals, and they lost to Anaheim back a few years ago. So I think experience in playoffs is what matters the most. I mean, Mason doesn't have a lot of playoff experience, so I don't think it's a bad thing to have Ray Emery in there because of experience and, some of the unknowns. I mean, he could get hot every year. One goalie in the playoffs really catches fire, and it could be Ray Emery.
Spending a few minutes with former NHL goaltender John Vanbiesbrouck. John, it's Chase. Thanks for joining the show. You played in front of two of the most intense and passionate fan bases in New York and Philadelphia. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, they are very passionate fans. For the Rangers being in an original 16, I mean, they go back, as we all say, back in the day. Their intensity has generations of it. And, for Philly, it's kind of equal. They're not an original 16, but they do have generational fans. So I think that the support that both teams show for their players is enormous. I know that it's been tumultuous in Philly for goalies in the past decade. I've experienced a little bit of that, but I can say it with a smile now, and not having to go through that. And in New York, they're a little bit, I think, more accommodating towards goalies, and they've had a little bit more stability in that area. I mean, obviously with Henrik Lundqvist, a Vezina Trophy winner and a very consistent guy, they can count on their guy in goal. In the past, they've had Richter and whatnot. So, but I think that the support that the fans show both clubs, is enormous and very satisfying to the players.
In a small sample size last year when Steve Mason came over in a trade, he showed some bright spots, but before the season he was in an open competition with Ray Emery. And back in 2009, he won the Rookie of the Year, he was nominated for the Vezina, and then he fell off a little bit. He has all the physical attributes, but this year he was finally was able to mix that with some mental confidence. How big is it to have that mental confidence when you're in net, especially in a rabid city like Philadelphia?
Yeah, I think that for Steve as an individual, he got vaulted into the limelight very quickly and didn't have the time in the minors like Ryan Miller had, who really, playing 3 years in the minors helps. But, Steve vaulted on the scene with Columbus and had early success, being Rookie of the Year, winning that trophy, and then having to deal with success is even though it's I guess short-lived, dealing with it in a long-term capacity is harder for a player because the goaltending position you have to be more consistent and not have the ups and downs. And then when you experience the ups and downs, it was tough for him. So I'm a little partial to Steve, and I identify with that a little bit more than some of the other factors and obviously positions on a team. I'm a little more sensitive, but I think the healthy rivalry between Mason and Emery has helped. And I think that the goaltending situation after losing Bobrovsky and him going on to have such success, I think it's more stable now than people will probably admit to. And it sounds like Coach Berube has confidence in both players.
I look at the legendary run that you went on when you were in Florida down south. You beat the Bruins, you beat the Flyers, the Penguins, and then you lost to a really good Colorado team. And you look at Henrik Lundqvist, he has so many accolades, won gold in the Olympics a few years back, has the most shutouts in Rangers history, has over 300 wins. But the one thing missing from his resume is a Stanley Cup trophy. How much pressure is on Lundqvist, especially in these times of the playoffs when he's had so much success?
Yeah, you can liken it to LeBron James, going from Cleveland to the Miami Heat. He didn't win a championship, and then the whole conversation around him winning a championship. I don't centralize a conversation around a resume and Henrik Lundqvist winning a championship. He has to depend on, so many other variables. But I think of him as probably the premier goalie in the game. I think a lot of young goalies are learning from him today. And, I just don't know if he has a team right now that is going to come out of that, that side in the East. There's so many other factors that are in play. I think he can lead them, and I think that, with him in goal, they're going to give, Philly all they can handle. But this is a tough East this year. To try to talk Stanley Cup right now, just playing game one, is very difficult. I think that if you're going to ask Henrik a question, he just wants to win them one at a time and not worry about accolades, awards, wins, and all the rest of the stuff that people talk and write about. I think he just wants to get it done one game at a time. And you know what? I think that the Rangers in the East right now are probably a dark horse where they need to be so they could surprise everybody, because you don't know what's going to happen with Nash and Richards and who's going to put up numbers for him. And, it's an interesting matchup with these teams, too, because of LeCavalier and St. Louis. Two guys that won Stanley Cups being in Tampa, and now they're on the other side of the ledger. So that's an interesting insight to the game as well.
We're talking to John Vanbiesbrouck, former NHL goaltender, played with both the Rangers and the Flyers. And, John, just getting real back to Lundqvist and the way he's played in the postseason, I feel like I tweet this out every year. He stands on his head, and it does come down to, in my opinion, lack of goal production. We saw him a year ago up against the Capitals. He had a shutout in Game 6 or 7, and I know his record in the playoffs is 30-37. I think that's overrated. It comes down in this series, to me, the Rangers offense going up against the Flyers defense. And when you look at that matchup on paper, that should be an area the Rangers win.
Well, it should be. However, everything's, back to zero. And, I'm not, when I was in goal against Patrick Waugh or somebody like that, I didn't look down at the other end and say, I got to beat that guy, because I'm not stopping his shot. So the big factor for Henrik is to be himself, and his margin of error, I think, is what you're pointing to. His margin of error is very small because, the Rangers' goal production, as you pointed out, is one thing that he has to depend on. However, he does have some great defensemen, I think, that are emerging in front of him. A lot of talk about Ryan McDonough being, healthy and having a full range of motion in his shoulder and playing healthy. That's the other factor that everybody has to look in playoff time is who's healthy. You can have a great team, but if you're not healthy, you're not going to get to the end of the day and to the big dance that you need to get to. So health becomes a big concern. I know that the good news for the Rangers and their fans is that Henrik is healthy. He's very confident, and, he's probably got one of the best heads in the game as far as shaking off, all the noise as far as goal production. I think he can win a couple games in the series. So one thing he can't do is score goals.
John, you know that Philadelphia enjoys the role of underdog, and they're the only team in the NHL to have 7 players who scored 20 or more goals this season, and the Rangers do have the advantage on the defensive end of the ice, especially with Lundqvist and net. What do the Orange and Black have to do to beat the Rangers and move on to the second round, in your opinion?
Well, I think they, need to get secondary scoring. I think they count a lot on Giroux. And, I hear, people talk about Vinny Lecavalier, that he's, not playing up to his potential there. But, again, he shows up and scores and does big things in big games. I think that one of the factors here is a Lecavalier in this series, I believe, because he's big, he's good on the draws. And, he has won in the past. I think that's one of the things that people aren't pointing to as much. They have guys that are really good support players. I think that, guys are emerging in that lineup, and they do have some veterans. People look at Flyers, and they don't talk Kimmo Timonen as much. I think that he's a big factor, and he's been a great defenseman in this league for a long, long time. And so they have experience. They have young players. The question mark obviously is always in goal. Who's going to play? And now that we know, and that Mason has a little bit of an injury, I think the players might play a little harder in front of Ray Emery. So all those little things will emerge, I think, out of Philly. And the number one thing that I think they have going in, as you pointed to, is a bit of an underdog role. The way they started the season, coach let go, Craig Berube doing a magnificent job with that club. So I think that underdog role, for a team that is well-built and emerging, is going to scare a lot of people in the East.
You played for a few head coaches in your NHL career, and Berube comes in 3 games into the season. Laviolette gets fired, and he helped this team get back on track right from the get-go. And although that first month was tough, since then, the Flyers have been one of the best teams in the NHL. How impressed were you with Berube's ability to get this team to buy in at the right time and kind of gain that momentum going into the biggest part of the season?
Yeah, it's been a great thing. I played with man known as Chief for a long time and against him, and I got a lot of respect for him. But the one thing I really gained is the way that he's remade his career as a coach. He spent a few years in the minors, learning the craft, but really feel strongly about him, about the way that he's dealing with star players. That's not always easy to do. And when you get a lot of these types of players, you have to get buy-in. And I think that he's done a great job of getting buy-in because he's been very straightforward. Some people have used the terminology of blunt to describe him. I think that these players today just want the facts. They want you to, just give it to them. And I don't think he's the type of guy that when I played with him, I know that he didn't pull any punches. No pun intended. He threw a lot of punches. So it was one of those. It's one of those types of things that I think when he speaks, a lot of people listen because he can back it up. And I think that's the Philly identity, and it's been an identity that I think everybody in hockey has admired over the years, is the strong-minded identity that backs up what they say. To me, that's what the Philadelphia Flyers are all about, and I think that's what Craig Berube's all about.
A few more with Beezer, John Vanbiesbrouck, who joins us on WHIP Radio in Philadelphia, getting ready for Game 1 tonight between the Rangers and the Flyers up in New York at Madison Square Garden. And MSG has been a place the Flyers have struggled in their last 8 games. They've been outscored 31-9 and haven't won up there. Does that at all get into a player's head when you sit there and lost to a team so many consecutive times?
Well, it can, but I think that, redemption is the greatest part of playoffs, and the opportunity is what makes a pro. And I think that all these players recognize on the Philly side that they have a new identity and a new opportunity and a chance at redemption here going into MSG. And with with young players, I don't think that a guy like Jacob Voracek or somebody like that is really going to be influenced too much, Braden Shen, by that. I think they're just going to feel like, hey, this is our time to have the opportunity at redemption. So I think that, we can look at that stuff, and when a team's got their number, maybe it does get in their head as this plays out. But I feel the opposite. I feel like they have this feeling like they can redeem themselves.
One X factor for the Flyers, and he's been a real solid player all year long for them, has been Wayne Simmonds, and he has a physical, dominant presence in front of the net, and he cashes in a lot and puts the puck right behind the goaltender. How tough is it as a goalie when you have a big player in front like a Wayne Simmonds? Because he could change this series just like how Avery did a few years ago going up against Marty.
Well, you bring up a very good point in Wayne Simmonds, not just about the fact that he's big and stands in front, but the one real significant piece that stands out to Wayne Simmonds is 15 power play goals this year. I mean, what's going to win in the playoffs is going to be specialty teams and health. And if Wayne Simmonds can stay healthy, and he's going to pay the price in front of that. 29 goals on the year, played in all 82 games. So, again, healthy player in Simmonds, healthy player in Voracek, Giroux, your top players are all healthy. And 15 power play goals, that's a ton of power play goals on the season. I think Wayne Simmonds, you pointed it out, could be the big factor in this series because he's going to pay the price in front of that, kind of like big old Tim Kerr used to do.
John, I know you only spent 2 years in Philadelphia, but did you enjoy playing for the Flyers in a culture that was put in place and a culture where the players kind of have to abide by those rules that Ed Snyder has put in place?
Yeah, I look at the Flyers have an identity as a family, and I really admire that. Yes, I only played there for 2 years, and I appreciated those 2 years. I always admired the organization from a distance. It's amazing when you play against an organization as much and you build this rivalry, you end up appreciating them in the same light. So I've always had that appreciation, and then the opportunity to play against a foe like Ron Hextall and some of the others, it was just a great opportunity. And at that time of my career, there was something that was coming into the game a little bit more prevalent, known as free agency. And so you had the opportunity to go to some of these teams that you've admired in the past and create a new opportunity. So I've always been fond of the organization. They're a very well-oiled, very well-run machine, despite some of the difficulties that you hear about. And obviously, the number one thing, goaltending, is they do a really good job. And they're a tremendous organization.
Beezer, last one from me. You have a prediction on who comes out in this series?
Well, that's a difficult thing. I like the scoring punch of Philly. I love the goaltending of the D of the Rangers. I think defense wins most of the time. I'm going to have to go with Philly in this one. I think the offense is going to dictate. I think Philly wins in 6.
Before we let you run, not only were you a great goaltender on the ice, you were also a great person off the ice, and we got to know you over the years. And I know you do some great work with the Allen T. Brown Foundation. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've met Alan, and this is his foundation is to find a cure for paralysis. We have a golf tournament every year in Westchester County in New York. Alan's been in a chair now. We're going on 26 years, and met him when I was a young goalie with the Rangers, and we've had a good relationship ever since. So, trying to find a cure for paralysis is a great thing. I think that we've had great support in the past, and it's just something that, I find as being worthwhile. So, I believe that. I thank you for researching that and looking into that. So, appreciate it.
Well, Beezer, we appreciate a few minutes today. Great work off the ice, and enjoy the first round, and I'm sure we'll talk to you again real soon.
All right, thanks for having me on, guys.
John Vanbiesbrouck right there, former NHL goaltender. We'll take a quick break, and we'll be back on the main event, WHIP Radio in Philadelphia, right after these short messages.